The sound came first, a dry crack slicing through the stillness, sharp as a bone snapping clean. Tahu winced. His left hand twitched toward the rifle leaning against the weathered wall, but he stopped halfway. A second crack followed. Not thunder, not coyotes, wood splitting under force, fence line maybe, or worse, trespassers. He slipped out the cabin door barefoot, heart pushing against his ribs. Cold wind bit through his shirt as he crossed the packed dirt porch, careful not to creak the floorboards. The moon hung low, red and swollen like an old wound. Below it, shadows moved against the cottonwood trees that marked the northern edge of the land. His grandfather's land, now his. He reached the edge of the porch and crouched low behind the stack of firewood. Another noise, this time a metallic clink like spurs brushing stone. He couldn't see them, but they were close. Too close. No rancher would come through that side of the property. Not at this hour. A voice carried across the wind, half muffled. "Break it fast. No noise after." Young, urgent, and not local. Tahu's pulse surged. That voice didn't belong here. The cattle had been restless for days, snorting at nothing, pacing in the dark. He should have trusted them. He reached for the rifle, now eased it into his hands. It felt cold and heavier than usual. The floor behind him creaked. He spun. A small figure stood in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket, wide-eyed. "Ayasha, go inside," he whispered. She didn't move. Her braids were loose lips, trembling. She was only 8, but she knew enough to be afraid. Tahu set the rifle down and walked to her fast but quiet. "Go wake your grandmother. Stay with her. Lock the door. What about you? I'll be right here." She hesitated, then nodded and vanished into the cabin. The door clicked shut behind her. Tahu turned back to the trees. Nothing now. Just wind and memory. But he knew what he heard. He waited 5 long minutes, breathing slow, heart drumming like a powwow drum. Then a soft jingle, faint metal again. They were still there. He stepped down from the porch and moved along the side of the cabin. Barefoot, on packed earth, silent. The dark had a weight to it. Something was wrong in the land lately. Like the dust had grown meaner, the nights more hollow. At the tree line he crouched low and listened. Stubborn old land. "Bet there's gold under it," the voice said. Again clearer now. Should have sold when he had the chance. They were talking about him, or his grandfather. Either way, they were wrong. Tahu crept closer, ducking behind a low juniper. He could make out 2 figures, young men, both armed, one kicking at a broken fence post. The other had a crowbar slung across his back. The fence wasn't just damaged, it was torn open. Just past it, his cattle huddled, spooked eyes wide and reflecting moonlight. They weren't here to steal cows. They were testing him. A twig snapped behind him. Tahu froze, turned. Another figure. Bigger. Closer. He lunged without thinking, shoulder slamming into the stranger's gut. The man went down with a grunt, and Tahu hit him again, fist to jaw. The rifle was too far. He reached for the man's belt gun there, but the man grabbed his wrist hard. They wrestled, kicking up dust, crashing into a low bush. "Tahu," a voice called from the cabin. Ayasha panicked. The man beneath him growled and bucked upward. Tahu lost grip, a flash of metal. He rolled off just as a knife swiped past his ribs. Then came the shot, a single blast echoing across the open land. The 2 figures at the fence ran. The man with the knife bolted into the dark, clutching his face where Tahu had landed a punch. Tahu lay still, panting, shirt torn open, blood beading at his side. The rifle shot had come from the porch. He looked up. Grandmother Nyabi stood there, both hands on the barrel, her nightdress catching in the wind. Ayasha clung to her legs, crying. I didn't hit him, Niabi said calmly. Didn't need to. Tahu sat up slowly, pain blooming in his side. Thank you. You always wait too long, she said. Just like your grandfather. He tried to laugh, but it hurt too much. She climbed down the porch with surprising speed, knelt beside him, and examined the cut. Shallow. You'll live. Inside, the oil lamp glowed behind the window, warm and still. Tahu looked toward the fence line. The cattle hadn't moved. The men were gone, but not far. This was a warning, he said. No. Niabi stood, her face hardening. This was a beginning. He nodded. She was right. This wasn't about cattle or fences. This was about something deeper: land, pride, memory. What do we do? He asked. Niabi looked toward the hills beyond the property, where the dust rose in slow curls. We dig in. He pushed himself to his feet, wincing. Ayasha ran to him now, wrapping her arms around his waist, holding tight. He hugged her back, eyes scanning the dark horizon. Somewhere out there, men were planning to take what wasn't theirs. Again. But this time they wouldn't find an old man too tired to fight. They'd find him. Tahu Blackhorse, grandson of the landkeeper of broken fences and bloodied hands. He had friends still. People in the town who owed his grandfather or feared Niabi. And he had questions to ask about rumors of mining rights, old land deeds, names whispered in back rooms. The cut on his ribs throbbed, but it was the ache in his chest that stayed. This land didn't just carry history, it carried ghosts, and they had started waking. Sometimes it ain't the trespassers you see in the dark that ruin you. It's the neighbors who smile in daylight. The morning sun didn't warm the wound on Tahu's ribs. It just lit up the dust and the damage. He stood at the edge of the broken fence, the shirt at his side stiff with blood and dirt. His cattle were scattered and jittery, spooked by the night before, their breath still visible in the cool air. Niabi worked behind him, stringing new wire without saying a word. She didn't need to. The way her hands moved tight, fast, with a rhythm carved by years, said enough. They'd been through this before. Tahu hammered in a new post. You think it was Levi Whitehorse's boys? She didn't look up. Levi's too careful. He wouldn't let his boys get their boots dirty without shaking a man's hand first. But they've been sniffing around the land for years, ever since grandfather passed. Niabi paused. Wanting something don't mean you're behind it. Don't mean you ain't either. Tahu turned toward the hills. The scars of old tracks crisscrossed the dry ridge, long faded but not forgotten. Survey crews had come through last spring, quiet men in clean trucks with clipboards and no answers. And then the letters. Talk of resource potential, mineral extraction rights. He'd burned the last one unopened. They'll try again, he muttered. They already did. Niabi tugged the wire taut and looked him straight in the eyes. And they didn't come just for cows. Ayasha came running from the house, then barefoot, and holding a slip of paper. Papa, Mama left this on the porch. I saw it under the axe handle. Tahu took it and unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was neat, sharp. You can't protect what you don't own. No name. Just that. And a print of a boot heel smeared in dust on the bottom corner. He folded the note once and slid it into his pocket. I'm going to town. Niabi didn't argue. Talk to Sam 10 Crow at the co-op. He hears everything before the sheriff does. I'll go after I check on Ellis. She stopped tying wire and raised a brow. Ellis Redbird. He's been holed up in that trailer for months. He sees what others miss. And he used to ride fence for my grandfather. If something's stirring out there, he'll know. She gave a sharp nod. Take the truck. And wear something clean. If you walk in looking like last night, no one will talk." He half smiled. Then maybe they'll tell the truth. It was close to noon when Tahu pulled up outside Ellis's trailer. The rusted thing squatted on the edge of the old service road like a tired mule. A radio played softly inside some old country ballad warbling about dust and heartbreak. Ellis was on the porch in a chair with only 3 legs carving something from a lump of wood. His long hair was streaked white now, tied back with a leather thong. His shirt had holes. His boots were unlaced. "You look like you've been in a fight," Ellis said without looking up. "I was. With 3 men. 2 I didn't see. 1 I did. Happened on our land." Ellis nodded as if he'd expected it. "You bring me coffee," Tahu handed him a thermos. Ellis unscrewed the cap, sniffed it, and grinned. "Niobe still makes it strong enough to strip paint. She says it's the only thing that keeps the ghosts polite." The old man laughed softly. "She's not wrong." Tahu sat on the porch rail and scanned the open stretch of land beyond the trailer. "You seen anything strange lately? Always see strange things. Question is which ones you believe." "I'm not looking for stories, Ellis. I need names. Who's been sniffing around the ridge?" Ellis took a sip, slow. "Heard Levi's been talking to outsiders again. Some folks out of Flagstaff. Suits, clean boots, big ideas about lithium, maybe gold. Any proof? Only the wind and a pair of binoculars. But I saw a white truck parked 3 nights last week near Dead Horse Gulch. No rancher parks there unless they're dragging a carcass." And there was no carcass. Tahu's jaw clenched. That gulch sat close to the western boundary, where the land titles were old complicated, where paperwork could get lost if you didn't keep your eyes on the courthouse. Ellis shifted in his chair. "There's more. Heard the sheriff's nephew took a new job. Working security for some private outfit. No name. Just an out-of-town check and a uniform without a badge. Sheriff know hard to say what the sheriff knows anymore." Tahu stood heart-heavy. "Thanks. If you see that truck again, I'll fire a shot and pour a second cup." Back in the truck, Tahu gripped the steering wheel hard. The road into town was dry and loose, and the dust followed him like a tail of ghosts. He stopped at the co-op first. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside. Sam 10 Crow was behind the counter marking up invoices with a red pen. "You look like hell," Sam said without looking up. "Appreciate it. Got a minute? Make it quick. I'm short on help and patience." Tahu stepped closer. "Someone came on our land last night. Broke the fence. Left a note. About ownership." That got Sam's attention. He looked up, eyes narrowing. "You get a name, no. But I've got a guess, and I think it connects to what Ellis told me." Sam exhaled through his nose low. "You'd be better off fixing fences and staying quiet." "That's not who I am." Sam leaned in. "You think this is the first time someone's tried to steal what don't belong to them? This valley's full of ghosts with blood on their boots. I'm not afraid of ghosts. You should be. They don't need sleep or rules." Outside, the wind kicked up again, tugging dust across the sidewalk. A white truck rolled past, slowly, too slow. The windows were tinted, and Tahu couldn't see the driver. But the boot print on the porch came back to him clear as a scar. He stepped out onto the street, eyes following the truck as it turned east toward the courthouse, toward Dead Horse Gulch. He didn't know what they were planning yet, but it was coming closer. And he wouldn't let them take what his grandfather died protecting. Not without a fight. Sometimes you don't find the truth in the courthouse records, you find it in the hands that buried it. The courthouse stood like a fossil, sun-bleached and heavy with old grudges. Its sandstone walls still bore the names of long-dead surveyors etched near the foundation. Tahu parked half a block away near the hitching post no one used anymore, and walked the rest. He'd shaved that morning and wore a clean denim shirt, but the ache in his ribs reminded him that fresh clothes didn't change the bruise underneath. Inside, the air was stale with paper sweat and decades of lost claims. He nodded to the receptionist, who gave him a tight-lipped smile and returned to pretending she wasn't listening. The records room was in the basement, past a creaky stairwell, and down a hallway that smelled like mildew and floor polish. It was mostly forgotten by now, used only by old ranchers trying to trace their boundaries, or oil men trying to find new ones. He signed the logbook and waited. No one came. He knocked once on the desk. Still nothing. Then a voice, low and familiar, came from the back shelf. If you're looking for the truth, it's buried under 10 feet of misfiled lies. Tahu turned. A woman emerged from behind a row of tall file cabinets, holding a folder so thick the rubber band barely held it closed. She wore jeans tucked into dusty boots, her black hair tied back with a red bandana, and her eyes sharp, wary, met his with both surprise and something unreadable. Naomi. He hadn't seen her in 4 years. She blinked. Didn't think you'd ever come down here again. I didn't think you'd still be here. Didn't think I had a reason to leave. He almost smiled. Almost. I need help. She raised a brow. And you came to me? You're the best person I know with dirty paperwork and a long memory. She tapped the folder against her palm. Flattery don't age well, Tahu. He stepped forward, dropping his voice. Someone came onto the land 2 nights ago. Broke the fence. Left a message. They're saying we don't own it. Naomi's expression changed. She stopped tapping the folder. You have your grandfather's deed, yeah. But I want to see what the county has on record. Boundaries, revisions, mineral rights, everything. She gave a short nod. Follow me. They walked together down the narrow aisle where boxes leaned against each other like tired men at the bar. Naomi unlocked a cabinet and began digging through folders. They've been messing with this system for years, she said. Digital records go back only 10. Paper ones go back further, but the stuff from the 50s and 60s, that's where it gets messy. Your grandfather's claim, Sakala Ridge, sits right at the edge of disputed territory. Tahu nodded. I know. That's why they want it. Naomi pulled out a faded map, unfolded it on the table. Red lines crossed over blue pencil. Survey stamps blurred by time and rain. Here, she said, pointing. Original deed says your grandfather had full surface and water rights across this stretch, Sakala Creek, to the East Ridge Line, to the west. And mineral rights. She shook her head. They're not listed. Not here. He frowned. That's not right. He always said he owned what lay above and below. He might have believed it. But belief ain't law. And someone recently filed a motion to review mineral rights in this whole zone. Tao leaned in. Who Naomi flipped through the forms. Shell Company. Listed under Morningstar Energy Holdings. But I traced it back last month for another rancher. It connects to a private equity firm in Phoenix. And guess who's their local fixer, Levi Whitehorse? She nodded. And his brother Denny. The one with friends in the county office. Tahu let out a long breath. So they're not just testing the fence. They're testing the record. Naomi's eyes met his again. You're not going to win this by fixing barbed wire. They're moving on paper. You're 3 steps behind. Can I copy these records? I'll do better. I'll walk them up to the assessor's office myself. But you need more than paper, Tahu. You need witnesses, people who remember. He thought for a moment. My grandfather's old friend, Walter Running Elk. He helped him mark the boundary stakes back in '59. He might remember where they placed the claim markers. Naomi folded the map. Then you'd better find him. And if you're smart, you'll talk to Alma Rivera too. She worked in land records back in the day. Half-blind now, but still remembers every signature she ever filed. Tahu hesitated before leaving. You staying out of this? She didn't look at him. I don't take sides anymore. That a lie? She smiled faintly. Maybe. He nodded once, then turned to go. Outside, the sky was heavy with heat, even though it was barely noon. Across the street, a group of men leaned against a pickup, watching him. One wore a white ball cap pulled low. Another had his arms crossed, revealing a long scar down the inside of his forearm. The one in the cap smiled slow. Tahu met their gaze and kept walking. He didn't need trouble in town, not yet. He drove straight to the edge of the valley to where the cracked road turned to gravel and the scrub grew thick. Walter Running Elk lived alone in a small adobe house surrounded by sunflowers and rusted tractor parts. The old man was sitting on a stool sanding a piece of cedar with smooth, circular motions. You're 2 days late, he said without looking up. Tahu frowned. I didn't call ahead. Didn't need to. The land talks. Tahu approached and crouched beside him. I need to know where the old stakes were driven. The real ones. The ones grandfather placed before the county maps got redrawn. Walter nodded. I remember. But they're buried now. Some on purpose. You'll show me, I will. But not today. Why? Because you're bleeding inside and that makes you reckless. Come back tomorrow. Bring Ayasha. She needs to see what's hers. Tahu stood slowly. You think it'll come to a fight? Walter's eyes finally met his. It already has. You're just catching up. Tahu drove home with the windows down, the wind stirring the dust, the silence stretching. The land looked the same, but nothing felt settled. At the house, Niabi was mending a saddle strap, Ayasha watching her with quiet eyes. Pack your boots, he said. We're riding out in the morning. Niabi didn't ask why. She just nodded. Ayasha blinked. Where are we going? Tahu smiled gently. To see where your blood runs in the dirt. The land doesn't forget where blood was spilled, it just waits for someone to remember. The morning air hung heavy with sage and silence. Tahu rode out ahead, his shadow stretched long across the dry brush. Behind him, Ayasha sat tall in the saddle, her small hands clinging to the horn, eyes wide with quiet wonder. She wore her grandfather's old riding gloves, too big for her fingers, but snug with meaning. Niabi trailed behind, steady and watchful. She hadn't said much since breakfast, but her silence spoke volumes. She understood this land's mood, its shifts, its warnings. The horses knew, too. They moved slow and sure, ears twitching, nostrils flaring at scents that didn't belong. Walter Running Elk waited near the old cottonwood stump, a place half swallowed by sand and time. His gray braids were tucked beneath a worn hat, and he leaned on a cane carved with a feather design. A shallow fire smoldered at his feet, coffee bubbling in a tin pot beside it. You're late, he said, as they approached, same words as the day before. Tahu dismounted first and nodded. Didn't rush. Good. Land, don't listen to men in a hurry. Ayasha slid off her horse and stood beside Tahu Dust, puffing around her boots. She looked up at Walter, then at the stump, then at the ridge behind him. Why are we here? She asked. Walter gestured toward the hills with his cane. Because your grandfather buried a line up there that don't show on paper, and because the men trying to steal it are counting on you forgetting where it starts. Tahu helped Niabi down, and the four of them stood together, wind curling around their ankles. Walter reached into his satchel and pulled out a leather-bound notebook. Its cover was cracked, corners curled. He handed it to Tahu. His writing. From 1959 to 64. Every fence built, every stone moved, every visitor noted. Tahu flipped through the pages, tight script sketches of the land names in careful lists. Then he saw at a page labeled Sikala Boundary, Spring of 60. 4 markers drawn with small crosses, notes in the margins. 3rd post buried after river shifted. Still valid, never moved. Walter pointed toward the ridge. We start there. 3rd post is under the rock shaped like a buffalo's head. Your grandfather wrapped it in copper wire to keep the spirits from wandering. Ayasha looked up. You believe in spirits, Walter gave her a look. Doesn't matter if I do. The land does. They rode halfway up, then dismounted and climbed the rest on foot. The slope was steeper than Tahu remembered, rocky and slick. The trail faded, but not lost. Ayasha moved with careful steps, eyes scanning everything, mouth set in concentration. When they reached the outcrop, Walter knelt with surprising ease and brushed aside a layer of gravel. There it was, the buffalo-shaped stone, weathered and sun-baked. He pointed to the base. Dig there. Tahu dropped to his knees, hands rough against the earth. The soil was dry, clumped with root and shale. He dug slow and steady. Niabi handed him her canteen, and he poured a little water to soften the top layer. Minutes passed, then a clink. He stopped. Ayasha leaned closer. What is it? He pulled back the dirt with his fingers. A copper loop glinted in the sunlight. Tahu reached down and tugged gently. Out came a rusted iron stake wrapped in corroded wire, still solid beneath the surface. Walter smiled. That's one. Niabi stepped forward. 3 more to go. They marked it with a red ribbon and a photograph on Tahu's phone. Then they rode to the 2nd location, a bend near an old cattle trail. There, too, the stake waited just below the crust. The 3rd was harder. Buried near a dried creek bed, it had shifted slightly over the years, but the shape of the nearby rocks matched the drawings in the notebook. After nearly an hour of digging, they found it. Walter stood above it, eyes misted. Your grandfather carried that stake up the hill in a thunderstorm, cut his hand driving it in, said the land needed to feel his blood. Ayasha stared at the rusted metal. Why didn't they teach us this in school? Tahu looked at her, his chest tight. Because history doesn't belong to the ones who lived it. It belongs to the ones who write it down. The 4th marker was near the edge of a canyon overlook. They reached it just as the sun hit its peak. Sweat ran down their backs, and the horses whinnied with heat. But when the final stake came free from the dirt, Tahu felt something shift deep in his chest. A hum almost from the ground itself. Niabi wiped her brow. That's the whole line. Proof enough, Walter nodded. If they come with paper, you show them iron. Let them try to bury what's already rooted. Tahu looked toward the horizon where the land dipped and shimmered with heat. They won't come with paper next time. I know, Walter said quietly. They rode home slow, the wind rising with a dry howl across the valley. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun was low, and the sky glowed like copper beaten thin. Tahu tied the horses and checked the fences again. Everything seemed still untouched. But when he stepped onto the porch, there was a new boot print in the dirt. Fresh, heading toward the back of the house. He crouched, fingers brushing the edge of the print. Not big, probably a scout. Light enough to move quiet, but careless enough to leave a mark. Ayasha came up behind him. Someone was here. He nodded. Today. Niabi stood in the doorway, eyes dark. We need to talk to Alma. If they're coming for the land again, we'll need more than stakes and memory. We'll need records they can't erase. Tahu stood slowly, the weight of the notebook still in his coat pocket. We'll go tomorrow. He looked out toward the dusk. The land had remembered. Now it was their turn to speak. Some truths hide in paper, but others are kept alive only by the people who refuse to forget. The sunrise bled orange across the ridgeline, staining the sky like smoke from a distant fire. Tahu drank his coffee on the porch, eyes fixed on the boot print near the back steps. It was still there, half smudged now, but unmistakable. He hadn't slept well. Every creak in the walls had made him reach for the rifle. Niabi packed a cloth satchel with jerky water and the leather notebook. Ayasha tugged on her boots at the doorway, quiet and watchful. The day before had changed something in her. Her questions had turned inward. She no longer asked if trouble was coming. She just waited to see what shape it would take. They left early before the sun could burn the ground to dust. The truck rattled over the rutted road into town, the silence between them broken only by the hum of old tires on gravel. Tahu gripped the wheel like he was holding something together that might come loose any second. Alma Rivera lived in the back of a converted mercantile next to the old train station. The outside was faded green with flaking paint, but a neat row of potted plants stood under the front window. Lavender, cactus, sage. The scent lingered in the doorway. Inside, Alma was sitting at a heavy oak table sorting through stacks of yellowed index cards. Her glasses were thick and slightly crooked, and her gray braid hung to her waist like a line of woven smoke. She didn't look up when they entered. "You're 2 days late." Tahu blinked. "Everyone keeps saying that. Because the land's been warning you for weeks. And so have I." Ayasha stepped inside, eyes wide. The room smelled of paper and cedar, and every wall was lined with boxes stacked with names. Decades of lives filed away like borrowed books. Niabi offered a respectful nod. "Alma." The old woman adjusted her glasses and finally looked up. Her eyes were pale blue and sharp as glass. "Tahu Blackhorse. You look like your grandfather, except you hold your jaw tighter." Tahu managed a small smile, probably because it's full of bad news. Alma reached for her walking stick and tapped it on the floor once. "Well, don't just stand there like thunder with no rain. Sit." They obeyed, settling into the mismatched chairs across from her. Alma picked up a thin folder, then paused. "You brought it, didn't you?" she asked. Tahu nodded and handed over the leather notebook. She opened it gently, as though touching a living thing. Her fingers moved across the pages like a musician finding notes in old strings. "I remember this handwriting," she said softly. "He came here every year to record updates. Didn't trust the county alone. Said men forget too easily when it suits them." Tahu leaned in. "Do you remember what claims he filed? What boundaries?" Alma turned a few more pages, nodding to herself. "I remember filing his mineral rights claim in 1960. They came in late after the deadline, but he had a signature from the regional agent enough to hold. County tried to erase it during the drought years. Said it was never official. But I made a copy." Tahu's heart jumped. "You still have it, I do." She rose slow but certain and shuffled to the back cabinet. She opened a narrow drawer and pulled out a brittle folder sealed in plastic. Inside was a signed mineral rights statement, original survey notes, and a copy of the agent's field report. Stamped. Dated. Legal. Tahu stared at it like it was a holy thing. They said this was lost. They always do. Alma said, sitting down again. But I keep what matters. Niabi nodded slowly. You kept it all these years. Alma didn't smile, but her voice softened. Your grandfather once paid for my roof when the bank refused. Said no one with roots in this land should sleep under a broken sky. Ayasha reached out and gently touched the paper. Will this stop them? Alma looked at her eyes narrowing. Child, it might not stop them, but it'll make them bleed before they take another step. Tahu folded the documents and placed them carefully into Niabi's satchel. I need this recorded with the county. You'll need a witness, Alma added. Someone who'll swear it's not forged, and someone willing to make noise if they try to bury it again. I know who to ask. They stood to leave, and Alma's voice stopped them at the door. There's something else, she said. They turned. Last month I had a visit. Man in a suit. Clean shoes. Asked about old claims. Said he was looking to clarify records. I asked who sent him. He didn't answer. Tahu felt his jaw tighten. Did he leave a name? No. But he had a phoenix tag on his car, and a tattoo on his left hand. Small star near the thumb. Niabi glanced at Tahu. Same mark Ellis described on the man near the gulch. Tahu nodded once. That's not just paperwork anymore. That's muscle. They left Alma's place as the sun reached its peak, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. Across the street, the same white truck from before sat idling. The driver leaned on the horn briefly, then waved. A slow, mocking wave. Tahu didn't return it. He just stared, memorizing the face behind the glass. They stopped next at the feed store where Naomi was checking inventory. She raised an eyebrow at the sight of the satchel. You get what you needed. Tahu placed the document on the counter and opened it just enough for her to see the stamp. Naomi exhaled. Well, I'll be damned. I need you to help me file it. Official, public, irrevocable. I can do that. And I need a witness. Her eyes flicked to Ayasha. Looks like you've already got the best one. No, he said. I need you. Naomi was quiet a long moment, then nodded. All right. But once this is filed, it's going to stir dust you can't sweep back under the door. Tahu looked down at the papers, then at Ayasha, who stood with her arms crossed, jaw set like stone. Then let it stir. When you make the truth official, you don't just shine a light, you draw every shadow closer. The courthouse smelled different that morning, less like dust and records more like tension. The kind that crawls up your spine and makes every footstep echo too loud. Tahu walked through the front doors, carrying the leather satchel like it was a bundle of dynamite. Niabi, Naomi, and Ayasha followed close behind. Clerks glanced up from their desks as they passed. One whispered something to another. Eyes lingered on the satchel, then looked away. The filing clerk behind the counter was new, young, clean-shaven, unsure of which drawer held what. Naomi slid the folder across the counter. Official mineral rights filing. Accompanied by original survey notes and witness statement. Copy notarized. You'll log it under Sakala Ridge, grandfathered parcels 42 through 47. The clerk blinked. I'll need to get authorization. Then go get it, she said. The boy stood up too fast and vanished through the door behind him. Tahu leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching the hallway. Naomi looked over at him. Still time to back out. I didn't come this far to turn around. Niabi nodded in quiet agreement. Ayasha clutched the strap of her small satchel, face hard as stone. Let them see it. The door opened again. Sheriff Luther Kane stepped through, slow as syrup and twice as thick. His boots thudded across the tile floor. He was a wide man, gray-stubbled and slow-talking, but he wore the badge like it meant something. Whether it still did that was up for debate. He stopped in front of the counter and tipped his hat. Well now, I heard there was a fuss brewing. Naomi didn't flinch. Not a fuss. Just a filing. The sheriff scratched the back of his neck. Heard tell there's some confusion about ownership up in the ridge. No confusion anymore, Tahu said. Just facts. Sheriff Kane looked at the satchel. And you're sure you want to make those facts public? Tahu held his gaze. Are you threatening me? Sheriff Kane smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Course not. Just making sure everyone understands what happens when you stir sleeping dogs. Naomi leaned in. Funny. I didn't know truth was something that needed to stay asleep. The clerk returned just then, looking flustered. We've made the copies. It's official. Filed under District Parcel Code B72. Confirmation numbers here. He handed the stamped document back across the counter. Tahu took it and exhaled. Not relief. Not yet. But a step. Sheriff Kane tipped his hat again. Well, congratulations. Let's hope it holds up. He turned and walked off Spurs, tapping across the floor like punctuation marks. Outside, the air was sharp. The sun beat down, but it couldn't chase the cold out of Tahu's chest. He turned to Naomi. It's done. She nodded, then narrowed her eyes. You know they'll hit back. I'm counting on it. They made it halfway to the truck before the engine revved behind them. A white truck, same one from before, peeled around the corner and came to a hard stop 10 feet away. Dust sprayed the pavement. The passenger window rolled down. Denny Whitehorse leaned out, sunglasses low on his nose. Well, well. Thought I saw ghosts walking into the courthouse. Tahu stepped forward. That your man who left the boot print behind our cabin, Denny chuckled. You think I'd waste time sneaking around hell? If I wanted your land, I'd just take it. Niabi moved in beside Tahu. You'd have to bury more than paperwork to do that. Denny's face tightened. Keep poking, old woman. You'll find the point. Ayasha stepped between them, small but still. Her voice was quiet. Go home. Denny stared at her for a long moment. Then he smiled again, slow and smug. Clock's ticking, Black Horse. You bought yourself a little time with that filing. But time's all you got. He rolled the window up, and the truck pulled away, tires whining. Naomi let out a low breath. They're not bluffing. I know, Tahu said. That's why we go next. Next, where? To the ridge. The afternoon sun was sharp against the hood of the truck as they headed back to the land. Tahu drove with one hand, the other resting lightly on the old notebook. Every mile felt heavier. Every fence post they passed looked like a challenge. When they reached the southern slope of Sakala Ridge, he pulled off the road. This is the spot they want, he said. Not the pasture, not the cabin. This stretch. The rock bed underneath holds something thereafter. Niabi stepped out and stared at the hills rising behind them. There was a story your grandfather used to tell about a fault line here, how during the monsoon one year the water ran red for 3 days. I remember Tahu said. He called it blood water. Ayasha walked ahead toward the rocks. It wasn't just a story, was it? No, Niabi replied. There's something under this ridge. Maybe copper. Maybe gold. But it's buried deep. Too deep for most to bother until now. Naomi crouched and brushed her hand across the dry soil. They're planning to drill. Tahu nodded. And they'll use whatever legal trick they can to justify it. Ayasha turned to him. What if the papers don't stop them? Then we stop them with more than papers. As they walked along the base of the ridge, Tahu spotted something half buried in the dirt. A metal stake, fresh. Not theirs. Not from 1960. He pulled it up. Attached was a red tag with a printed code. Surveyor's mark. They've already been here, he said, his voice low. Naomi took it and examined the tag. This code, this isn't county. It's private. Morning Star. Tahu looked up at the hill, jaw clenched. This is war. There's a difference between fighting for land and fighting for memory. Only one of them will bury you with honor. The wind came in hard from the east that night, dragging grit across the porch in long, hissing waves. Tahu sat with the rifle across his lap, eyes on the dirt road that curved around the ridge. He hadn't said much since they pulled the Morning Star stake from the ground. The metal was still sitting on the kitchen table inside its bright red tag like a warning flare. Niabi stepped out with a blanket draped over her shoulders and a steaming mug in her hand. She handed him the mug and sat in the chair beside his. They'll come again, she said, not asking. He nodded. They've already marked the spot. Probably have a crew ready to move in once the legal dust settles. You think they care about the filing? No. Not really. They just needed a reason to push. Filing gave us a reason to push back. Niabi looked out into the dark. They won't stop with threats this time. I know. She sipped her tea. We'll need help. I've been thinking the same. Behind them, the screen door creaked, and Ayasha stepped out wrapped in her own blanket. She said nothing, just sat on the steps, small and quiet, listening. Tahu glanced at her. Couldn't sleep. She shook her head. He looked back at the ridge. Neither can I. In the morning, he left before dawn, driving the truck down the valley road toward Broken Mesa. The sky was still a soft gray rimmed with a promise of heat. The town hadn't woken yet. Dust hung motionless in the air, and the dogs were still sleeping beneath porches. Ellis Redbird's trailer came into view. Smoke drifted lazily from the stovepipe. Tahu parked, grabbed the coffee thermos, and climbed the steps. Ellis was already on the porch, whittling something small, a horse maybe, or a deer. You're late, he said without looking up. Tahu grinned. You say that every time, 'cause it's always true. He handed the old man the coffee, and they sat in silence for a while. The wind whispered through the scrub, carrying the smell of creosote and something faintly metallic. They marked the ridge, Tahu said. Ellis stopped carving. Morning Star. Tahu nodded. They ever ask permission, Numba? Ellis blew on his coffee. You still got the document, I do. You think they care? No. No? Ellis turned his carving over in his hand, then set it down. So what's your plan? Tahu leaned forward, elbows on his knees. We need to make this public. Not just through records, through people, faces, history. We need to remind this town who built it, who bled for it. Ellis looked at him, eyes sharp. You want a fight? I want the truth. If that turns into a fight, so be it. The old man stared down the valley, then nodded. All right. But don't ask people to stand beside you unless you're willing to take the first bullet. I am. Ellis stood slowly, stretched his back, and walked inside. When he returned, he was holding a canvas bag and an old photograph. He handed the photo to Tahu. It showed 5 men standing in front of the Sakala Ridge, young and proud. One of them was Tahu's grandfather. Another was Ellis. We staked those lines with our hands, Ellis said. That photo was taken the day we finished the last boundary post. My brother took it. You bring this with you when you speak. People remember faces better than maps. Tahu took the photo chest tight. Thank you. By noon, he was back at the cabin. Naomi had arrived while he was gone, talking quietly with Niabi over a spread of old town records. They moved fast, she said when he walked in. County received an appeal to challenge the deed. Guess who filed it, Denny? Under Morningstar's name, but it's him. The hearing is set for Friday. That's 3 days. Naomi nodded. We'll need more than Ellis. You said you wanted a public fight. We need a meeting. Tonight. Niabi looked up. Then we call the community together. The ones who haven't sold out. The ones who still carry their names like roots. Tahu went to the back room and retrieved his grandfather's ledger, the thick one with the red spine. It held the names of every hand who'd ever worked the ridge, every trade and favor, every time someone helped mend a fence or deliver hay in the rain. He placed it on the table. We invite them all. They spent the rest of the afternoon making calls, driving to ranches, knocking on doors. Some welcomed them in with strong handshakes and stories. Others were hesitant eyes darting toward the east, toward the money they'd already taken, or hoped to. But by sundown, people began to arrive at the cabin. Trucks lined the dirt road. Horses were tied to the fence. Chairs were pulled out, fires lit. The smell of coffee, fried bread, and old tobacco filled the air. Walter Running Elk arrived with a walking stick, carved with names. He sat near the fire without speaking, but everyone nodded when he did. Alma came too, holding a folder and wearing her courthouse badge pinned crookedly to her sweater. Ellis took a seat beside the photo, his hands folded like prayer. Tahu stood with the ridge behind him, firelight casting his shadow across the crowd. He raised the photo. This is what they want to erase, he said. Not just land, not just rights. Memory, this our stories, our blood, our hands in the earth. They think we'll forget, that we'll lay down quiet. He held up the survey stake with the red tag. They already planted the next lie. It's up to us to dig it out. There was silence. Then Walter stood. In 1959, we carried fence posts up that ridge through floodwater. We didn't ask for permits. We didn't wait for signatures. We put our names into the dirt because no one else would. He pointed his stick at the stake. If they want to take this land, they'll have to rip our names out with it. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Some clapped. Some nodded. Some looked down, afraid, but they had come. Naomi stepped beside Tahu. We hold the meeting again tomorrow. Bigger. Niabi looked out into the dark. Then we better be ready when the shadows come looking. Fear doesn't always come with a shout. Sometimes it slips through your door like dust, quiet, patient waiting. The dog barked just before dawn. Low one bark, then another. Not the sharp yelp of surprise, but a warning sound, deep alert, telling the house that something out there wasn't right. Tahu was already up, lacing his boots on the edge of the bed. He didn't speak. Didn't need to. Niabi stirred from her room down the hall. Ayasha was sitting cross-legged on the floor, clutching her small knife like she knew what was coming. The wind had shifted overnight. The valley smelled of metal and motor oil. By the time Tahu reached the porch with his rifle, the sun was barely brushing the tops of the hills. A fine mist hung low over the brush, and the air felt too still. Then he saw it. Across the ridge, just inside the boundary line, two trucks. Not white this time, green utility trucks with company plates and bright hazard lights that blinked slow and arrogant in the early light. 5 men stood beside them. No hard hats, no clipboards. These weren't surveyors. Tahu raised the scope and watched through it. One man knelt at the ground, hammering in something small. Another walked the property line, dropping stakes every 20 feet. The third leaned against the hood of a truck, arms folded, face blank. Watching. Niabi stepped up beside him. They're not hiding it anymore. They want us to react, to overstep. Ayasha came to the doorway. We don't have to go to them. Just wait until the hearing. Tahu lowered the rifle. If they finish staking the perimeter, they'll claim it's theirs, on paper or not. We have to go now. He turned to Niabi. Wake Ellis and Walter. Tell them to meet us at the ridge. Bring the filing documents, the originals, and the photo. She nodded once and disappeared inside. They rode up together, Tahu, Ayasha, and Naomi in the lead truck, Dust trailing behind like a war signal. Ellis and Walter followed in an old flatbed, the tribal flag tied to the antenna fluttering wild in the wind. By the time they reached the site, the men were nearly finished marking a wide perimeter, encroaching a full 60 feet past the original boundary posts. Tahu stepped out first. The man leaning against the truck turned toward him, smiling. He wore boots too clean for the land and a sport coat too slick for the desert. His shirt collar was open, but his posture screamed authority. Corporate. Dangerous in a quiet way. You must be Mr. Blackhorse, the man said smoothly. I'm Joel Carr. Morningstar Energy. Tahu nodded once. I know who you are. Carr gestured to the ridge. We're performing a preliminary assessment. Non-invasive. You'll find it's within our rights under the development permit. Naomi stepped forward. That permit was contested and frozen pending the mineral rights hearing. You're trespassing. Carr tilted his head. Paperwork says otherwise. Walter walked forward, leaning hard on his carved stick. Paperwork doesn't hold this land. Blood does. Carr's eyes flicked toward him but didn't flinch. With respect, sir, emotion doesn't carry legal weight. Tahu took the photo from his coat pocket and held it up. This is from 1959. Survey complete, markers placed, boundaries documented. Mineral rights filed and witnessed. Your stakes are inside that protected zone. Carr didn't even glance at it. Old photos are sentimental, Mr. Blackhorse. Not binding. Not when they're accompanied by original survey notes, Naomi added, producing the folder. Filed and time-stamped. Certified by Alma Rivera and 2 county clerks. The court has it already. Carr's smile remained fixed. Yes, and we look forward to resolving that. But until then, he stepped aside as his men brought out a small metal device and placed it into the soil. It began to whir softly, blinking green lights pulsing in rhythm. A resonance scanner, Carr said. Perfectly legal. Won't break soil. Just reads depth and mineral presence. Nothing more than a flashlight in the dark. Ellis stepped forward. You don't light up something unless you're planning to dig. Carr turned toward him. If there's value here, the state has interest. You know how these things work. Progress doesn't wait. Tahu stepped forward, inches from him now. This land remembers every footstep, every storm, every man who came through pretending he was just passing by. You don't own what remembers you. Carr's smile thinned. You think you can scare me with poetry? Tahu said, but you should be scared just the same. Car's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, looked at the screen, and his jaw twitched. We'll be leaving now. One of the workers glanced up, confused. But we haven't packed it up, Carr said sharply. They moved fast, too fast. In minutes, the equipment was back in the truck, and the stakes yanked up in angry silence. Carr didn't speak again. He climbed into the passenger seat and rolled the window down. See you in court. The trucks drove off, engines growling over the ridge. Tahu watched them go, dust kicking up around the tires. Ayasha stood beside him, arms crossed, wind tugging her braid. They'll be back. Yes, he said. But now we know their face. Naomi exhaled beside him. We need to move up the town meeting. Bring more in. Show them this isn't just a land fight. It's a pattern. A threat. Walter nodded. Let them see the whites of the wolf's eyes. They spent the rest of the day resetting the original markers, driving them in deeper flagging, each one photographing everything. Tahu made copies and locked them in a metal box beneath the floorboards of the cabin. That night, Ayasha fell asleep with her boots still on, curled up in the living room beside the fire. Naomi stayed late helping Niabi sift through land titles and family documents. Old debts. Old gifts. Every strand of thread that tied the land to the people. Tahu stood on the porch again, rifle across his lap, and stared at the dark stretch beyond the trees. Something was out there. Not just men in trucks, but something older. A threat that came wearing suits now instead of spurs, and he would not let it pass. When truth gathers in a room full of people, it doesn't whisper, it roars. The community center hadn't seen this many boots in years. By 6 o'clock, the parking lot was full. Horses were tied to the rail fence, and the smell of leather dust and cigarette smoke hung thick around the open doors. Inside, the old gym echoed with the low murmur of neighbors catching up, arguing softly, comparing stories they thought they'd buried with the past. Tahu stood at the front of the room, arms crossed, watching people arrive. Naomi was at the folding table by the door, signing folks in, handing out copies of the mineral rights documents, and a sheet that simply read, "Who owns the ridge?" Ellis stood near the heater cane, resting against the wall, nodding at old ranch hands and retired tribal officers as they passed. Walter was seated in a folding chair beside the front row, both hands on his carved walking stick, stone-faced. Ayasha helped set out water jugs and coffee, her braid swinging behind her with purpose. Tahu scanned the room. Some faces were wary men who had sold partial rights to Morningstar years ago, hoping no one would notice. Others looked ready for a fight, tired of silence, tired of being stepped over. Niabi approached and rested a hand on Tahu's shoulder. We have the room. Don't waste it. He stepped up to the mic. The hum of the crowd quieted, and the creak of metal chairs filled the gaps. I won't give you a speech, he said. You've all seen what's happening. Trucks rolling and flags planted without permission, men in suits telling stories with loopholes instead of truth. What they're doing isn't new. They've done it before, just not with clipboards. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. He held up the photo of his grandfather and the other men on the ridge. This land was marked by hands, you know. Hands you trusted. They planted those boundary stakes 50, 60 years ago. Morningstar's crew pulled them up last week like they were weeds. He passed the photo to the first row. Take a look. Pass it back. That's what they're trying to erase. A hand went up near the back. Even if the court sides with you, a voice called out, what's stopping Morningstar from buying out the next valley over, or this one 5 years from now? Tahu nodded. That's why we're not here just to talk about this land. We're here to talk about all of it. Every ridge, every waterway, every deed that's been lost or adjusted in the last 20 years. This isn't about a single hill anymore. It's about whether we matter. Naomi stepped forward, holding a second document. This, she said, is a copy of the filing Morningstar submitted last month. They claimed it was exploratory, non-invasive. But we found their stakes 50 feet inside Tahu's boundary line. That's not a mistake. That's a test. Alma Rivera, seated in the second row, raised her voice steady and sharp. They think we won't fight because we don't wear ties. Because we keep our stories on the porch and not in courtrooms. She stood slowly. But I've kept copies of every land filing I ever touched. If they want to fight on paper, we'll bury them in it. Laughter broke out dry and short, but it softened the room. Tahu glanced down and caught Ayesha's eyes. She gave him a small nod. He stepped back up to the mic. Tonight, I'm asking you to sign your names on a joint claim of resistance. Not just against the development of Sakala Ridge, but against any unauthorized drilling across the valley. We stand together or we get picked off one at a time. The room was quiet. Then a chair scraped back. An older woman stood, face-weathered, hands trembling slightly. My father leased a section of our land in '94. Never told us. We found out 2 years ago when they started flying drones over the pasture. We told them to leave. They laughed. I'm tired of being laughed at. She stepped forward and signed the list on the front table. One by one, others followed. Young and old, ranchers, retired teachers, even Levi Whitehorse's cousin who hadn't spoken to Tahu's family in over a decade. By the time the list was full, the room had changed. People weren't just sitting, they were standing in groups, talking fast, planning, exchanging phone numbers, and old stories like ammunition. Walter walked up beside Tahu. You've stirred them. I didn't stir anything. They were already boiling. Walter smiled faintly. Now they have a fire to cook on. Outside, night had fully settled. Crickets sang in the distance. A coyote called far off. Naomi gathered the signed forms and documents into a single folder. I'll file this tomorrow with the tribal council. And then the county. They'll see it. Might not like it. But they'll have to answer it. Tahu nodded. That's all I want. Niabi poured herself a coffee in a paper cup, staring out at the trucks in the lot. You feel it? Tahu looked at her. What the line shifting? They're not just fighting us anymore. We're fighting back. Ellis stepped outside and lit a cigarette, watching the shadows in the trees. They'll come harder now. I know, Tahu said. Ayesha walked up beside him. Let them. He looked down at her. Her voice had no fear in it. She was her grandfather's blood, and the ridge was no longer quiet. The wind changes before the storm shows itself, but those who live by the land feel it in their bones first. The storm rolled in just after midnight. Not the kind with thunder or lightning, but the kind that whispered in fences and rattled dry branches against windows. Tahu sat up in bed before the first knock came at the door, heart already ticking like a clock about to break. A second knock followed sharp, then a pause. He pulled on his boots and took the rifle from its place above the door. Niabi met him in the hallway, already wrapped in her coat. Ayesha stood just behind her, fully dressed, eyes steady. None of them asked who it was. They all knew. Tahu opened the door. Sheriff Luther Kane stood on the porch, his hat in his hands, dust on his boots. Behind him, 2 deputies stood near their vehicle, the red and blue strobes casting long shadows across the yard. Kane cleared his throat. Mr. Blackhorse, what's the charge? No charge. But you've been summoned to appear before the county board at sunrise. Emergency hearing. They're reviewing the mineral claim and the resistance filing. Naomi stepped out from the side of the house, coat pulled tight. That wasn't scheduled until Friday. Kane didn't look surprised to see her. Morningstar filed a petition to expedite. Claims you're interfering with lawful development. Says your recent gathering could be seen as intimidation. Tahu's jaw tensed. Is that what they're calling it now? A community meeting. Kane sighed. I don't like it either, son. But the board has the right to move it up. You've got 4 hours to get ready. I suggest you bring everything you've got. Niobe's voice was cold. We'll be ready. The sheriff nodded once and walked off the porch. The crunch of gravel followed him until the door closed. Ayesha turned to her father. What do we do? Tahu looked at her. We don't flinch. They moved quickly. Naomi drove back to town to retrieve documents and copies. Niobe gathered the boundary photos, the original survey notes, and the signed witness affidavits. Tahu packed the photo of his grandfather and the original ledger, proof of generations that could not be denied. By the time they reached the county building, the horizon was barely pink. Fog hung low, the kind that swallowed shapes and made even known roads feel like strangers. The parking lot was already half full. News vans, trucks with out-of-state plates, and the white SUVs of Morningstar's legal team. Tao stepped out of the truck into the chill. He felt it in his ribs, not just the cold, but something else. The shift, the tilt of a day that wouldn't move backwards. They walked into the chamber together, Tahu, Naomi, Niobe, Ayesha. Behind them came Ellis, Walter, Alma, and nearly a dozen community members who had signed the resistance petition. More trickled in as the minutes passed. Inside the room had been arranged like a courtroom. Long table at the front. County board seated in a row. Morningstar's counsel, led by Joel Carr, sat smug behind a polished binder and a thin smile. The lead commissioner cleared his throat. We'll begin with a review of recent filings. Carr stood first, all grace and confidence. Ladies and gentlemen, our client, Morningstar Energy Holdings, has lawfully secured a provisional development permit under the State Mineral Rights Clarification Act. We are not here to seize land, but to explore beneath it. That is our legal right. He turned to the audience, almost theatrical. But what concerns us, and should concern this board, is the obstruction campaign launched in direct opposition to a lawful operation. Boundary markers destroyed workers, harassed unauthorized meetings designed to stir unrest. Murmurs rippled behind Tahu, quickly silenced. Carr continued, voice softening. We respect the traditions and values of this region. But tradition cannot overrule the law, and sentiment, however heartfelt, cannot be allowed to interfere with progress. He sat. Tahu stood. He walked slowly to the front, unfolded the photo, and placed it on the table facing the board. This isn't sentiment, he said. This is fact. He passed out copies of the original survey map, the notarized mineral rights claim, the witness statements from Walter and Ellis, the land use logs. Naomi handed the board the ledger. We're not fighting against progress. We're fighting for truth. This land was claimed, worked, and recorded. Not in the shadows, but in the open. These men filed when it mattered. And when their paperwork was threatened, the people who remembered stepped forward. He paused, scanning the faces before him. Morningstar didn't ask permission. They didn't come through the front door. They sent men to stake claims under cover of night. They filed paperwork in towns most of you haven't heard of. And when we pushed back with nothing but voices and proof, they accused us of intimidation. He turned toward Carr. Isn't it strange how often the powerful feel threatened by the sound of ordinary people refusing to disappear? The commissioner held up the old photo. Who else can verify these names? Walter stood from the back. I can. He walked slowly down the aisle, cane echoing. I was there when that stake was driven. I carried one of them up that ridge. We weren't rich men. We weren't legal scholars. But we knew what was ours, and we trusted the county would honor it. Ellis followed him. I can verify the handwriting. I was the one who brought the ledger to town each spring. Alma stood too. I signed the mineral claim myself. If you're going to erase it, then you might as well erase me. The board fell silent. Carr opened his mouth, but no sound came. Finally, the commissioner leaned back. We will review these documents and witness statements fully. Until then, all development activities are suspended, including Morningstar's exploratory actions. Gasps. Relief. The pressure in the room loosened like a rope going slack. Carr stood slowly. You're setting a dangerous precedent. No, the commissioner said. We're honoring one. Outside, the fog had lifted. The sun was breaking clean over the hills. Naomi touched Tahu's arm. We bought time. Tahu looked past the courthouse steps toward the land beyond. Then we better use it. Not all battles are loud. Some are won in the quiet by those who keep standing after the dust has settled. The wind that swept over Sakala Ridge that morning wasn't the kind that pushed things over. It was the kind that held still, heavy in its silence, as if the land itself was waiting to exhale. Tahu stood near the third boundary post, boots dug into the earth. He ran a gloved hand over the copper wire wrapped around the iron stake, weathered but still firm. The same one his grandfather had planted 65 years ago. He didn't have to look to know Ayasha was behind him, crouched beside the fourth post, checking the marker. We've checked everyone twice, she said, looking up. I know. Then what are we looking for, Tahu? Straightened eyes scanning the horizon. If they're going to move again, it'll be today. She stood with him, the same ridge at her back, the same wind pressing into her jacket. You think they'll ignore the board? I think they already have something in motion. He looked to the southwest where the dust hung longer than it should, a thin plume trailing across the lower pasture. A truck, maybe. Or worse. The decision to come up early had been Niobe's. She'd woken them before dawn, coffee already boiling, and said only, the wind's too quiet. And she was right. You don't live on the land your whole life without feeling when something shifts. Down by the creek bed, Ellis and Walter walked the old fence line, double-checking the tension and replacing 3 cracked posts. Alma was back at the cabin organizing files and keeping the phone line open in case the county board called. Naomi was in town gathering supplies, her car packed with duplicates of every legal document they had. Insurance in case Morningstar tried something through back channels. Tahu didn't trust silence anymore. A sharp whistle echoed from the eastern edge of the property. Ayasha turned first, her hand shielding her eyes from the rising sun. It's Ellis. They jogged downhill together. By the time they reached him, Ellis was holding something in his hand, a plastic tag still dusted with soil, bright orange, a new one. Just found it staked behind that mesquite, he said. Too far from the others. Not ours. Tahu took the tag and turned it over. No logo. No name. Just a number. 7X. Walter took one look and grunted. That's not Morningstar's. Ayasha frowned. Then who is it? Ellis met Tahu's gaze. Another player. Tahu turned toward the trail that led back to the road. We need to move. Fast. Back at the house, the silence was broken by the soft whir of a fax machine. Alma stood over it, reading the incoming page as it printed line by line. Her eyes narrowed behind her thick glasses. "It's from the courthouse," she said. "Someone leaked the mineral survey data. It's out now. Public. No names, but the coordinates are clear. They're broadcasting what's under this land." Niobe took the sheet from her and read it. Her voice went tight. "Lithium, gold, and a rare earth seam at the southern basin. Deep. But it's there." Ayasha looked from one face to the next. "So what does it mean?" Naomi walked in just then, coat still unbuttoned. "It means they're trying to stir up interest, invite buyers, open the floodgates." Tahu clenched his jaw. They couldn't win in court. "So they'll bury us in offers." Walter sat down slowly. "That's how they took the fields in Red Bluff. Not with law, but with greed. They turned neighbors into buyers and buyers into enemies." A silence fell over the room, heavy, hot. Ayasha spoke first. "So what do we do?" Tahu looked around the room at the elders who had lived the first fight, at the woman who carried the records of every hand that built this valley, at his daughter, standing tall in the space his grandfather once filled. "We go to the others," he said. "Not just the ones who stood with us. The ones still on the fence. The ones thinking about selling. We go before the buyers do." Naomi nodded. "If we can get them to sign on to the joint trust, then even if they take me out of the fight," Tahu said the landholds. Ellis reached into his coat and pulled out a folded map, an old survey annotated in pencil. "I still know every parcel and who owns what. We can make a list tonight. Ride out first light." Niobe was already pulling the ledger off the shelf. "Then we better get to work." That night, the house became a headquarters. Coffee brewed non-stop. Pages flew from the copier. Ayasha sat with a yellow notepad writing names, checking phone numbers, marking who they trusted, who might turn, who needed to hear it from Tahu himself. No one slept. The wind picked up again near midnight, louder this time. It shook the eaves and bent the dry grass flat. Tahu stood on the porch, same place he always did, the ridge a dark shoulder against the stars. Naomi stepped up beside him. "They're pushing from a different angle now." "Yeah," he said, "which means the next move won't come with trucks." She looked at him, eyes tired but sure. "You ready?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out the original photo, the one of his grandfather, Walter Ellis, and the others smiling in front of a fence that still stood. He held it out to her. "I'm not fighting for just this land," he said. "I'm fighting for the men in this picture, for the ones who never had a courtroom, the ones who never made it to the hearing. They held the line. Now it's our turn." Naomi took the photo and tucked it into her bag. The first light broke over the ridge, and the battle began again. Land doesn't belong to those who claim it loudest. It belongs to those who never leave it behind. The sun was high over Sakala by the time Tahu finished the last stop of the morning. His boots were caked in red dust. His voice, rough from hours of explanation, had thinned to a whisper. But he'd done it. Every ranch, every trailer, every family with a name tied to the land, they'd all heard the truth. Some signed the trust without hesitation. Others needed more time. A few slammed their doors. But most listened. Because deep down they knew what was coming, and they knew it wouldn't stop with Tahu's boundary line. Morningstar's map didn't end at the ridge. Back at the house, Naomi sat on the porch with the ledger in her lap, checking off names. Ayasha brought water in tin cups to everyone. As they returned, Ellis Walter, Even Niobe, who had spent hours walking between isolated homesteads by foot when the truck wouldn't make it through the mud. "They're scared," Naomi said, "but they're listening." "They should be scared," Tahu said, "but not of us." Walter settled into a wooden chair, breath shallow. "You get to a certain age, you stop fearing men with money. You start fearing what happens if no one remembers your name." Tahu crouched in front of him. "You won't be forgotten. Then make it count." Ayasha sat on the steps, watching the trees shift in the wind. "What if it's not enough?" Tahu looked out toward the ridge. The horizon shimmered under the weight of the afternoon heat. "Then we keep standing, even if it isn't." A low rumble sounded in the distance. They all paused. Not thunder, not wind. Engines. 3 black SUVs rolled up the county road, clean and slow like wolves in a straight line. One parked at the end of the driveway. The other 2 pulled along the shoulder, blocking the way out. Joel Carr stepped out of the lead vehicle, sunglasses on sleeves, rolled, his walk calm as ever. Tahu didn't move. He waited on the porch as Carr approached. "You don't quit," Carr said, smiling. "No," Tahu replied. "But you knew that." Carr looked around, taking in the house, the people watching from windows, the tribal flag tied to the antenna, the fire still smoldering in the barrel out front. "You've made it hard to do this quietly," Carr said. "Wasn't ever going to be quiet." Carr's smile faded. "We've made a final offer. It's higher than market value. You accept, we walk away. No courts, no noise, no one gets hurt." Tahu stood. "And if we don't," Carr leaned in, voice lower, "then you'll lose. Maybe not this week. Maybe not this year. But the next storm will come. And the one after. You can't keep rebuilding forever. You'll wear down. And we'll still be here. Waiting." Ayasha stood beside her father, now eyes narrowed. "Then you'll be waiting a long time." Carr looked down at her, then back to Tahu. "Think carefully." Tahu stepped forward. "I already have. You came here for land. We live here for something bigger. You're not fighting soil, you're fighting memory. And memory has teeth." Carr didn't respond. He simply turned, got back in the SUV, and drove off. The other vehicles followed, tires spitting dust. No one said a word until the sound faded completely. Then Walter chuckled. He blinked. Naomi shook her head. "He blinked because he wasn't ready for you to be louder than him." They gathered that night under the stars. Not just the family. The whole valley. More than 50 people stood around the fire. Some brought folding chairs. Some brought drums. Some just stood in the dark, letting the sound of crackling wood and slow songs carry across the basin. Niobe told stories first about her grandfather's hands worn from clearing brush and signing deeds with equal weight. Then Ellis spoke. Then Alma. Then others. Each one recounted a piece of land as memory. Not as acreage, but as lives lived, moments marked in dust and storms, births under the cottonwoods. Marriages held beneath the open sky, graves dug with their own shovels. Ayasha walked up holding the old photo. She held it out to the group. "This was taken before I was born, before my father. But they're here still, in every one of you." She pointed to the hills. "That ridge isn't a border. It's a reminder. And no one will take it while I'm breathing." Silence followed. Then a single clap. Then more. And it wasn't just applause. It was something else. It was an answer. Later, Tahu sat with Naomi and Niobe, looking out over the fire's dying glow. The stars were clean above them. The wind gentle now. They'll try again, Naomi said. Of course they will, Niabi answered. Tahu took a deep breath. Then we'll be here. Ayasha had fallen asleep with the ledger in her lap. Tahu lifted it gently and placed it back inside the house on the same shelf his grandfather had once built. As he stepped back outside, the sky was shifting toward dawn again. The land was quiet, not because the fight was over, but because it was being held, not by lawyers or threats, but by those who stayed, those who remembered, and those who never left.